Dozens of countries are looking to China to rescue them from the COVID-19 pandemic. That's because the Chinese government has pledged to donate nearly 500 million vaccines worldwide. After its failure in handling the initial outbreak and spread of COVID-19, Beijing is eager to repair its image in the world. Vaccine diplomacy could potentially be the face-saving tactic to change the narrative and expand its drive for global influence.
In a Europe ravaged by COVID-19, this is what hope looks like. Belgrade, Serbia, waiting in line for liberation from the pandemic. But these injections are about more than public health. They were flown in from China to a presidential welcome, Chinese state TV on hand to capture the moment. Just the latest part of a massive pandemic rebranding exercise that mixes medical assistance with disinformation.
We have seen some quite sustained efforts also to try to spin the debate in a way that makes it look like it didn't start in China and China was, only the first country to report it.
What's happening here is something that goes well beyond a pandemic and far exceeds the scope of China's official diplomatic missions, like here in Berlin. It's a much bigger campaign for global influence that's been building up for years and will continue long after the pandemic is over. The most visible driver of this is the Belt and Road Initiative, a project spanning more than 100 countries that is redrawing the map of China's economic power. In a single region in Europe, Chinese funds are pouring into highway bridges in Montenegro, a coal-fired power plant in Bosnia, and a giant seaport in Greece that may yet become the largest in Europe. And you can see signs that these investments can translate into political influence. Like at the United Nations Human Rights Council, where China won a show of support last year for its controversial suppression of freedoms in Hong Kong. 4 out of 5 countries backing China had signed up to Belt and Road. These efforts to shape global perceptions come right from the very top. China's President Xi Jinping was the opening speaker at this year's virtual Davos meeting, exuding confidence and positioning Beijing as the world's greatest champion of global cooperation.
There is a strong desire to show the superiority of, the Chinese system, to give examples that show why perhaps in the 20th century democracies were cute and useful and good, but now for the 21st century, the only systems that are really suitable to face the challenges of this century are systems that are closer to the Chinese system.
US President Joe Biden has made his debut on the world stage, vowing to push back at that idea, saying democracy will and must prevail. And Germany's Angela Merkel says that the West must now engage in this unfolding competition.
It's important that it's not only China and Russia that are delivering vaccines to developing countries.
It might seem like madness that lining up for a vaccine can mean picking sides in a geopolitical battle. But that is shaping up to be our new reality. A battle for influence and even ideas about nothing less than how to run the world.
A report by DW's Chief International Editor, Richard Walker, who joins us now. Richard, we heard in your report that Beijing is promoting a counter-narrative about the origins of the pandemic, trying to convince people it didn't start in China. Is it gaining any traction with that effort?
Well, Terry, it's really too early to say in this phase where we're talking about vaccines diplomacy at the moment. Obviously, this has really only just begun. But the latest research that we do have from just towards the end of last year from Pew Research just show that, especially in Western countries or countries that are members of the kind of democratic community of the West, they have a massive image problem. So negative evaluations of China in the UK, in Germany, in the Netherlands, in Sweden, in the US, in South Korea, Korea, in France, in Canada, in Australia and Japan. All of those countries, over 70% of respondents, over 80% in some cases, said that they had negative views of China. Now, this isn't all about the pandemic. A lot of this goes back to things that have been happening over the last couple of years. The real surge you've seen is over the last 2 or 3 years. We're talking about what we've seen, the suppression of political rights in Hong Kong, accusations of genocide over actions in Xinjiang against the Muslim minority there within China. So there are a lot of reasons for these negative views of China at the moment, but the COVID pandemic has certainly been the latest kind of icing on the cake.
So China's vaccine diplomacy, which we saw there in your report, is obviously making some inroads, particularly in developing countries. Critics may point to questionable ethics there, but isn't it true that China is filling a gap that Western countries have not?
That's absolutely right, Terry. I mean, if you look at the vaccination situation in the West, and particularly in Europe, it's really not a pretty picture, and in two ways. First of all, governments are getting accused, particularly in Europe, of being far too slow at vaccinating their populations, getting the vaccines rolled out far too slowly. But at the same time, if you look at the actual numbers, European governments are massively prioritizing their own people, and so the United States, compared to, say, the developing world. Now, there is this international initiative called COVAX, which has a lot of very high-profile sign-ups. Germany is a very prominent supporter, has poured quite a bit of money into that. But COVAX has just announced its first initial allocation of vaccines to developing countries around the world. They're talking about an allocation of 237 million vaccines. Well, think about what the European Union has ordered. It says it's ordered 2.6 billion for the European Union alone. So 237 million for the developing world, 2.6 billion for the European Union. You're absolutely right. There is a wide open door that China and, of course, Russia as well are walking through.
Should we expect this crisis, Richard, to allow China to expand its foothold in Europe?
Well, of course, we've been talking quite a bit about developing countries, that China's, both its vaccine drive and its Belt and Road Initiative kind of primarily focus, say, on the global south, you could say. But it's also looking at countries within Central and Eastern Europe, sort of countries that are either on the periphery of the European Union or relatively new members of it. Take Hungary, for example. Viktor Orban, the sort of strongman prime minister of Hungary, recently became the only EU leader to order the Sinopharm vaccine, the Chinese vaccine, into Hungary. He took a shot of it himself, saying that he trusted it more than the Western vaccines. Now, that is a huge boon for the Chinese government. That's something that they can play back home to the domestic audience, showing here's a Western leader saying that they trust our vaccine. But also that is a foothold within Europe, and that is something that we've seen over recent years, China trying to kind of pick off countries within Europe that it can build favorable relations with, countries that can then support it in international fora, like we saw in the report there, and chipping away at the unity of the West, which is very much a long-term objective of China and also Russia.
Richard, thank you so much. DW's Richard Walker there.